After a brief period of time spent alone at home, a girl vanished from sight. It was hard to imagine that anything like that could have happened in real life. So what happened next felt more like a detective thriller than a true crime. When the truth was eventually revealed after 15 years, everyone was horrified. On May 2, 1982, Jessica Dison was born in Shepherdsville, Kentucky, a small American town. It was a peaceful community where most people knew one another well and were engaged in farming. Jessica helped her parents look after their two younger brothers while they were at work from a young age. Jessica became more self-sufficient as a result, and her parents could always count on her. In order to pay for her first car, at the age of 15, she started working a part-time job at a nearby restaurant. A few years later, she had saved up enough cash to fulfill her dream of owning a red Pontiac. Jessica had good grades, despite working a part-time job, and she began to plan to go to college to become an accountant after graduation. When Jessica, then 17 years old, started her senior year in the fall of 1999, she also began dating a boy, which made her very happy. Her day started out normally in the morning, on Friday, September 10th. While Jessica was still asleep, her parents left for work, her younger brothers left for school, and went to the bus stop. Jessica stayed at home and was expected to take her car to school shortly after her brothers. When her mother got home, sometime around noon, she noticed something strange right away. Jessica was supposed to be in class, but her car was parked in front of the house. The mother went to her daughter's room after entering the home. When Jessica was not in her bedroom, her first assumption was that she might have overslept and missed school. The mother then speculated that Jessica might have called her father to see if he could give her a ride to school. When she called him, he replied that he had left for work by himself that morning. The mother attempted to start Jessica's car with a spare key she had taken from the house, thinking there might be a problem with it. But as she got closer to the vehicle, she noticed an unsettling scene. First of all, the driver's door was ajar. Secondly, and perhaps more concerning, Jessica's phone was resting on the seat with the numbers 9 and 1 displayed on the screen. One of Jessica's shoes and her keys were under the front seat, and her work clothes, purse, and textbooks were in the back seat. The mother assumed the worst right away. It was obvious that someone had opened Jessica's phone to dial 911 but had stopped short. Furthermore, it is clear that Jessica could not simply leave her belongings in the car and drive away. She would have needed to walk several miles along the road because the family lived on the outskirts of town. Jessica's parents discovered that their daughter had not shown up for class when they called the school. The school should have informed them about this, but for some reason it hadn't. A few hours later, Jessica's parents received a call from Jessica's best friend at the restaurant where they worked, informing them that Jessica had not arrived for her shift, which further alarmed them. Jessica's parents decided to call the police after becoming concerned about her absence from school and work, as well as the fact that her belongings, including a phone with 911 dialed, had been left in an unlocked car. But the sheriff just said that Jessica probably wandered off and would come back sometime. He did not even seem to notice that she could not go very far without one of her shoes because it was left in the car. Jessica's parents begged the sheriff to launch an investigation because they thought their daughter might be in danger, but he refused, so they were forced to go back home. Following that, Jessica's parents made the decision to act independently. Despite reaching out to friends, family, and acquaintances, nobody had reported seeing her. They began looking for Jessica together all over the town, but she was nowhere to be found. Her parents returned to the sheriff the following morning to inform him that Jessica had not returned home. He sent 2 officers to check her car this time, but their parents were now dealing with a second issue. The officers touched everything inside the car with their bare hands as they looked over it without wearing gloves. Jessica's room was not checked by them, despite the fact that it was standard procedure. Jessica's parents attempted to seek assistance from the local media by bringing attention to their daughter's disappearance and the police's lack of interest. After being let down by law enforcement once more, they started their own search and started handing out flyers with information about Jessica, along with family and friends. Leading the search were Jessica's father and his brother, Stanley, who was familiar with the area. They made the decision to search the area around a nearby river out of fear for the worst. Because of its overgrown and remote location, the area had a bad reputation and was frequented by local drug dealers and other criminals. Jessica's family searched the rough terrain by the river for hours, without finding any sign of her. A very strange thing happened the following morning. Jessica's parents were at home with their son, who was playing in the yard. He hurried inside after hearing what he thought was his sister's voice calling for assistance. Grabbing his shotgun, Jessica's father hurried outside to try and find the source of the cry. Simultaneously, his brother arrived at their residence and promptly joined the search. They saw something soon after. David Brooks, their 40-year-old neighbor, had smoke rising from his property. They saw him burning what appeared to be clothes on his land. As they got closer, because of the suspicious appearance, Jessica's father requested permission from Brooks to search his farm. But Brooks declined, requesting that they depart. There were other strange aspects about Brooks as well. His family and Jessica's relatives had a regular relationship up until Jessica vanished. But not long afterward, Brooks started acting strangely. He began driving past their house slowly, on a regular basis, while grinning menacingly at them. Additionally, Jessica's parents received strange phone calls from an unidentified man who just breathed heavily without saying anything. They had a suspicion that Brooks was responsible, but they were unable to fathom his actions. Jessica's parents made the decision to talk to the police again after seeing Brooks burn clothes on his land. The police had initially shown little interest in the case. They agreed after the family shared their observations and requesting that police bring cadaver dogs to Brooks. The dogs found the fire pit on Brooks's property after tracking Jessica using her clothes, but no significant evidence was discovered. In one of the sheds, the dogs also found black gloves, indicating the presence of a decomposing stench. Even though Brooks continued to act suspiciously during the search, the police were unable to link him to Jessica's disappearance and left empty-handed. Jessica's father decided to contact the FBI after being let down by the police. Normally, the Bureau declines to become involved in an investigation based only on calls from the families of missing individuals. But on this occasion, they made the decision to do so right away. After conducting extensive research and considering the unsettling information provided by Jessica's parents, the FBI came to the conclusion that something genuinely horrifying may have happened to Jessica. After that, a thorough investigation got underway, one that the local police had been hesitant to carry out. Fingerprints from Jessica's car and room were gathered by FBI agents. They also seized all potential evidence for analysis and sent it all to the lab. Additionally, the investigator coordinated a thorough ground search with the help of helicopters and volunteer recruitment. They thought that maybe Jessica's body was in the pond near her house, so they looked all over the bottom. After thoroughly searching Brooks's farm, FBI agents discovered something extremely concerning. They discovered a printed picture of Jessica inside one of the sheds. Detectives were almost positive that Brooks had some sort of involvement in her disappearance following this unsettling discovery. Joseph, his 35-year-old brother, was also a suspect because of his peculiar behavior during the police search of his property. During the search, something went wrong. Investigators concentrated all of their efforts on the search in the area, nearly certain that Jessica had died, since they could not find any evidence strong enough to bring the brothers to justice. 17 days after her disappearance, on September 27, the police got a call. While driving beside the river where Jessica's father had first looked for her, a woman noticed something odd next to a tree off the road and decided to investigate. As she got closer, she noticed it resembled a human body and immediately dialed 911. When the FBI agents got there, they did in fact discover a young woman who was missing a few fingers and limbs and was dead. Detectives came to the conclusion that she had been sexually abused because she had a rope tied around her legs with paint traces in red and silver, and some of her clothes were missing. The decomposition was so advanced that they were unable to positively identify it as Jessica. After visiting her home, the policeman asked her parents for assistance in identifying her. Jessica's mother concurred, but her father found it difficult to look at his dead daughter. When she arrived at the scene, she was initially unable to identify her, but soon realized that the small butterfly tattoo on her body was in the exact same location as her daughter's. Subsequently, medical professionals established the deceased's identity and concluded that strangulation was the cause of death. Her body was also covered in numerous bruises. The most shocking discovery was that Jessica had been alive for about 3 days after going missing, even though experts had determined that her limbs and fingers were detached post-mortem, indicating that she was still alive at the time. It implied that although the police had a chance to save her, they did nothing at all to do so. The FBI decided to re-interview Brooks following the body's discovery, and this time they discovered something new. Brooks initially told the FBI that he had seen Jessica the morning she disappeared, when they had first spoken. In the second interview, he altered his account to claim that he had not seen her at all that day. He said he was at home that morning in bed with his wife, and she had given a different account of her husband's testimony when the detectives questioned her. Even though there was no such evidence, the FBI persisted in questioning Brooks, asking him what he would do if they discovered his fingerprints on the victim's body. Brooks's response was very suspicious. He said that in that scenario, he would have to admit everything. The FBI chose to arrest him and proceed with the trial after he failed a polygraph test. They knew that, since they had not discovered any conclusive evidence connecting Brooks to the murder, the likelihood of a guilty verdict was minimal. All they had was unsettling, albeit circumstantial evidence of his involvement. The detectives kept working the case and looked for any more evidence. While preparing for the trial, investigators remembered another intriguing detail. Something like the rope that was used to bind the victim's legs was discovered when searching Brooks's vehicle. But no DNA samples were discovered on it, so this is just more circumstantial evidence. Start of the trial was in January 2003. Brooks's attorney maintained that there was no evidence at all and asserted his client's innocence. During the trial, another thing was revealed. Investigators discovered the victim's missing limbs in close proximity to the body when they found it. After putting them in designated containers, they gave them to the neighborhood police. They allowed the boxes to decompose extensively at room temperature, disregarding labels that advised storing them in the refrigerator. Therefore, even in the unlikely event that there was any evidence such as possible DNA traces from the murderer, it was lost as a result of this mistake. The other circumstantial evidence against Brooks was not strong enough. Ultimately, the man was released because the jury was unable to come to a unanimous verdict. State statutes said that he could only face new charges in the event that fresh evidence surfaced. This was a devastating blow to Jessica's parents. They were nearly certain that Brooks was responsible for the death of their daughter. Furthermore, their daughter might have been saved if the police had taken their duties more seriously. Thus, they ultimately gave up on getting justice. This case was not resolved in the ensuing years and was eventually nearly completely dropped. Lynn Hunt, a new detective, started working with the local police force in 2012. She was tasked with investigating unsolved cases, and she was drawn to Jessica Disson's murder right away. She was horrified to see how careless her predecessors had been after reading through the case files. The majority of the documents contained numerous mistakes, lacked any mention of discussions with the parties concerned, and improperly documented the evidence. To put it another way, it was handled so poorly that she was forced to essentially begin the investigation anew. Her first move, 13 years after the murder, was to get in touch with Jessica's family. She was given a box containing Jessica's possessions from her car by one of her brothers, who is now an adult and lives apart from his parents. Ever since the police gave the family back these items, he had held onto it. Hunt was astounded once more at how heedlessly her colleagues had handled the evidence and neglected to store it in accordance with protocol. It was unlikely that these things would help her now after many years. Still, she examined everything she could find with diligence. She soon found out a fascinating detail. It was the report from Brooks's medical examination among the documents. It said that he had an extremely low IQ of only 61. This sparked questions about all police activities, including questioning Brooks. He may not have fully understood most of the questions and may not have provided adequate answers due to his significantly low IQ. All of this made Hunt wonder if the man had anything to do with the case at all, since his strange behavior could just as easily have been caused by his extremely low IQ. Hunt then started to speculate as to who else might have killed this person. She did a thorough investigation on every person connected to the case or residing nearby. This continued until September 2014, which was almost 15 years after Jessica's passing. A departmental colleague called Hunt with some interesting information. An inmate at a Kentucky state prison asserted that he knew Jessica Dison's killer's true identity. Hunt was a little skeptical about this lead. When prisoners wanted to provide the police with information, it usually ended in disappointment and wasted time. Many of them merely make up stories to get early release or better treatment while incarcerated. Nevertheless, she realized that she had to follow up on this lead to ensure it was genuine. She went to see the man who was supposed to have the information at the prison. He claimed that for a while, he and another person convicted of the same charged child abuse shared a cell. The two grew close on this common ground and occasionally shared information about their crimes. The cellmate informed him one day that he had killed Jessica Dison, among other things. The detective was shocked when the informant then dropped a bombshell, revealing this man's name. It was Jessica's uncle, Stanley Dison, her father's brother. The informant claims Stanley admitted to him that while Jessica was residing in their home, he had sexually abused her for a number of years. If she ever discussed it, he threatened to kill her or someone close to her. When Jessica got a boyfriend in the spring of 1999, Stanley became concerned that she would eventually confess to him about the abuse she had received from her own uncle. Jessica was home alone on September 10th when Stanley showed up in the morning. After loading all of her belongings into her vehicle, she went outside. Jessica resisted Stanley's demands that she end her relationship with her boyfriend, threatening to expose him if he did not leave her alone. She reached for the phone to try to dial 911 as he began to threaten her. Jessica managed to escape Stanley's attempt to grab her and escaped inside the house. Before bringing her to an abandoned shed close to where her body would eventually be discovered, the man followed her to her room, struck her, and bound her in her sheets. After torturing and mutilating her for several days, Stanley killed her, moved her body to a prominent spot close to the road, and buried the sheets beneath the shed. He added that he amputated a few of the victim's limbs in an attempt to fool the police into believing drug traffickers were responsible for the murder. Detective Hunt came to the conclusion that the informant could not have made this detail up because only Jessica's closest relatives were aware of the missing limbs. Finally, he mentioned that Stanley had buried Jessica's shoe next to the shed, under a broken tree. Hunt made the decision to confirm all of the details regarding the hidden evidence. She contacted Jessica's brother and a few other relatives who agreed to help with the search because no one from the local police department could assist her due to staffing shortages. She chose to wait to inform them that Stanley might be the murderer in order to gather proof for these startling claims. They did not find any hints on the first day of the search. They dug in the areas that fit the informant's description in the pouring rain, but they got nothing. Hunt and Jessica's brother went back to the location the following day. They started excavating the soil inside the abandoned barn he had indicated to them along the way, and almost instantly a long-awaited breakthrough occurred. A bedsheet that had been buried was found. Hunt got the evidence and raced over to Jessica's place. Her parents had not altered her room in all these years. It was just the way it had been since the day their daughter disappeared. This allowed Hunt to verify that the discovered bedsheet was a piece of Jessica's bedding. The other linens had the same pattern, but it was absent from the bed. Following this discovery, Stanley was taken into custody and questioned right away. Despite looking visibly shaken during the conversation with the detectives, he refused to confess to the crime. He was eventually accused of murder, and the matter went to trial. The fact that his brother had done such a horrible thing to his daughter was beyond shocking to Jessica's father. He went through a period of total denial before accepting this intolerable truth. He later remembered that Stanley had suggested looking for Jessica's body near the river in the early days of her disappearance, but he became ill during the search, so his brother drove him home. As it turned out, Jessica was found only a few hundred yards from the barn where this had occurred, indicating that Stanley may have purposefully misled them into thinking she was still alive. Detective Hunt conducted background research on the suspect in an effort to gather more evidence before the trial. Hunt quickly learned of an even more unsettling truth, though she already knew he had served time for abusing another girl in their family. A number of other women who were close to Stanley reported to the police that he had molested them when they were little. He would tell their family that he was temporarily homeless and ask them to let him stay in their house for a while. This pattern was consistent. Stanley used threats to silence the girls when he was left alone with them and carried out his heinous acts. After hearing all of these accounts, the police came to the conclusion that Stanley had been doing this for 30 years. Despite this, Detective Hunt recognized that it would be difficult to convict Stanley of the murder because there were so few clear-cut pieces of evidence, like fingerprints or DNA. She kept working on the case until she came across a box of old files that she had not yet looked through. Examining its contents, Hunt was struck once more with the ineptitude of her predecessor's handling of the case. There was a letter in the box, dated June 26, 2002. The same account, which Hunt heard from the prisoner in Kentucky just 12 years later, was submitted to the authorities by another informant. Stanley had already been incarcerated since the summer of 2002 for attacking a minor relative. He told his cellmate about killing Jessica during that period. The cellmate, who happened to be a police informant, wrote a letter to the department in charge of the case, detailing all of Stanley's heinous crimes against his niece. And what do you think happened? Did the police just disregard the letter, perhaps convinced of Brooks's involvement during those years, and stop looking into other possibilities? Hunt was again displeased with the incompetence of her colleagues. Had they been more diligent in their work, this case might have been resolved in 2002. She could only wait for the trial now, years later, in the hopes that Stanley would at last receive long overdue justice for his deeds. Stanley proclaimed his innocence before the proceedings started in 2015. Jessica's parents were in the courtroom, and they could barely look at the relative who had ruined their lives. And they were angry that he could not just come clean and offer them some sort of resolution. Due to the dearth of strong evidence against him, the prosecution thought there was little chance of getting a guilty verdict on the murder charges. The assault accusations against the other girls in the family presented another issue. The prosecution chose to offer Stanley a plea deal because all of them would have to testify in court and give detailed accounts of what Stanley had done to them. In exchange for Stanley's confession about his assaults on family members and his involvement in Jessica's murder, they agreed to remove the death penalty. Ultimately, he consented and entered a guilty plea. He was not obliged to reveal any particulars about the crimes as part of the agreement. Jessica's parents were unhappy about it because they wanted to know the whole truth, but Stanley had to keep quiet because of the terms of the plea agreement. The murderer was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with the possibility of release after 15 years. Stanley may be released at age 71, as he was 56 at the time of sentencing. Following the trial, Jessica's father pledged that he would wait for his brother to take matters into his own hands if he did not pass away in jail. In 2019, Stanley denied killing Jessica in his first interview. He said that he had been at work that morning. However, after 20 years, it was impossible to confirm. Furthermore, he was unable to explain how two unconnected informants could have come up with the same tales, including details like a bed linen burial site that the murderer alone knew. Detectives have yet to rule out David Brooks's possible small role in the case. Stanley could have asked for assistance in getting rid of the victim's belongings because Stanley knew him. Brooks may not have fully understood the situation given his low IQ. He may have set the girl's clothes on fire, and Stanley may have given him the gloves that contained the body odor that the dogs had picked up on. He might have left Jessica's picture in Stanley's shed so that it would frame him. The truth, though, might never be known because Brooks passed away in 2021 from cardiac issues. It is important to remember the incident where Jessica's younger brother mistook a cry for assistance outside for his sister on the third day after Jessica vanished. There is still no way to know for sure what transpired at that moment. Stanley was detaining the girl several miles from her residence in the barn, so it is possible that she was still alive. There is a somewhat unlikely possibility, but the child most likely imagined it because they were stressed, or else someone else was screaming. Stanley was probably not far from the house because, as we remember, he drove up just after Jessica's father hurried outside. It is possible that the girl was unconscious or had her mouth taped shut while in his car, but this theory does not seem very likely.
When a clown appeared in front of Marlene Warren's door and presented her with flowers and balloons, she didn't know that the clown was a killer with a gun hidden away in the costume. For over 3 decades, the case of the killer clown remained a mystery to detectives, Florida residents, and true crime enthusiasts all over the world. Marlene Warren was born on the 15th of April, 1950. When she turned 22, she married Michael Warren, who was 19 years old at the time. Marlene already had 2 children from her previous marriage, and Michael appeared to consider her 2 young sons to be his own. The couple grew together, working hard and making a name for themselves. They bought a number of companies, including a used car dealership for Michael. The family was able to maintain a reasonable standard of living because of their several revenue streams. Life for them was like a bed of roses, such that they could afford a 500-square-foot house in Wellington, Florida's upscale Aero Club neighborhood. Each of the homes in this area have their own runway and hangar, which enabled residents to fly their private aircraft whenever they like. The Warrens appeared to have it all, yet this was not the case at all. At his auto dealership in 1983, Michael experienced legal troubles. Customers accused him of fiddling with the odometer, and the authorities arrested him. He was consequently given an 18-month probationary period. By the year 1990, it was widely known that the Warrens were experiencing marital issues. Michael was allegedly having an affair with Sheila Keene, one of his staff. Despite Sheila and Michael's denials to these allegations, Sheila's husband decided to leave her. On May 26, 1990, a white Chrysler LeBaron with no license plate traveled down the street where Michael and Marlene lived. Marlene and a friend were in the kitchen when they saw a clown-costumed person approach the front door with a basket of flowers and balloons. Marlene grew up in a clown-loving family. Her family adored clowns so much that her mother keeps a whole room filled with clown collectibles. She had paintings of clowns that 14 years old Marlene had created. For the adoration of clowns, Marlene hurried to the front door to welcome her visitor. Her son, Joseph Aarons, who was present at the time, recalled hearing his mother comment, "How pretty." This appeared to have been Marlene's last words, because a short while afterwards, everyone in the house, including Joseph's friends who came visiting, heard a pop sound. At first they thought the noise was a balloon popping, but then they noticed Marlene tumbling to the ground. Now at alert, everyone sped to the door. The balloons and flowers were left behind as the clown nonchalantly made his way back to the white Chrysler LeBaron. Joseph tried to run after the clown, but he couldn't go as far because he had a cast on his leg. He, however, remembered screaming at the clown to turn around. The clown turned and gave him a wide-eyed brown stare. Its face lacked any expression. The clown soon climbed the white Lebaron and sped off. The sole description offered by witnesses was that Marlene had been shot by a clown with brown eyes. Even the gender of the clown was a mystery to them. Joseph and one of his friends had tried to follow the clown in their own car, but they lost track of it. Marlene Warren was rushed to the hospital. It was determined that she had been shot twice in the face at point-blank range. She struggled to survive but died 2 days later at the hospital. Detectives checked in with Michael Warren, who wasn't home at the time of the incident. Michael had a solid alibi. He got the terrible news while en route to a Miami racetrack with friends. He hastily went back home to offer comfort to the family. When questioned by the detectives, he provided as much information, cooperating with the investigation process. He was soon ruled out as a suspect. The authorities were perplexed. According to a spokesman for the Palm Beach County Sheriff, the killer clown case was the strangest thing he had ever seen in all of his 19 years working as a law enforcement agent. 2 hours after the murder, authorities got a solid tip. A caller who wished to remain unnamed suggested that the police should thoroughly question Michael Warren and Sheila Keene. Before the police could ask her any more questions, she hung up. Sheila Keene was in town at the time of the murder, but Michael was traveling with friends. Sheila claimed to have been at work, but in reality, she was a repo person for Michael's dealership. Her alibi wasn't exactly solid. A few days after Marlene Warren's killer clown case made headlines, 2 employees of the neighborhood costume store named The Spotlight reported a weird experience to the police. They claimed that one woman with chocolate brown hair came up to them just as they were about to lock up the store. She pleaded to be allowed inside. The employees informed her that they were closed and advised her to come back the following day. She, however, was persistent and informed them that she really needed a costume that evening. It was a strange request because it wasn't Halloween. It was almost Labor Day weekend. Regardless, the 2 employees were sympathetic and allowed her enter the store. She was claimed to have bought white makeup, a red nose, white gloves, an orange afro wig, and a clown outfit. Later on in the investigation, the 2 employees selected Sheila Keene from a lineup of photos and declared that they were fairly certain that she was the woman who showed up begging to buy a clown costume. The detectives soon looked into the supermarket store that sold the flowers and balloons the clown had brought to Marlene's house. It was discovered that the supermarket was close to Sheila Keene's house at the time. Also, the supermarket staff selected Sheila from a lineup of photos. The white Chrysler LeBaron, the getaway vehicle, came into consideration next. When asked, Michael Warren asserted that he had no knowledge of the vehicle. He claimed only Chevrolets were sold at his dealership, but Payless, his main rival, had a Chrysler LeBaron. Michael and Payless had a history of disagreements, especially over an advertisement that Michael's dealership ran that included the phrase Payless and was purported to be an attempt to confuse buyers. One time, a client from outside the area rented a white Chrysler LeBaron from Payless. The customer searched up Payless's number when it was time to return the car, but ended up contacting Michael's dealership instead. The client said they were instructed to park the vehicle outside the dealership with the keys inside the sun visor. The LeBaron, however, later vanished. After the murder, the getaway vehicle used by the clown was abandoned in a grocery store parking lot. During their search, police discovered orange synthetic threads in the vehicle that resembled a clown wig strands. They also discovered brown long hairs. Sheila Keene had long brown hair at the time of the murder. The police found more orange fake hair strands inside her residence during a search warrant. At this point, everything seemed like a simple situation to resolve. But that wasn't the case. Michael and Sheila vehemently denied being involved in Marlene's murder. They refuted having a conversation with the police without the presence of a lawyer. DNA testing was just getting started in 1990, so the investigators' available evidence was circumstantial. The investigation into Marlene's murder was abandoned, but Michael's legal issues intensified. During the course of the investigation into the murder, Michael's unlawful business dealings came to light. Police discovered proof of additional odometer tampering and consumer overcharging. Following the arrest of an employee, Michael surrendered himself to the police. In 1992, Michael's case went to trial, and he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. After being released in 2002, Michael married Sheila Keene a few years later. The couple started a new life in Tennessee by operating a restaurant. Sheila changed her name to Debbie and informed the community that it was a childhood nickname. Michael must be a good businessman because his new restaurant was a success. The couple's success allowed them to settle in Heron Point, a posh neighborhood close to the Virginia-Tennessee border. They made lots of friends and fit in well with their new neighbors. Few locals were familiar with their history. Michael told their new community that he has owned restaurants since he was a teenager. Marlene Warren's demise benefited Michael as well. He was the beneficiary of Marlene's life insurance policy, not her son. He took over $50,000 from Marlene's family, leaving them with virtually nothing. Detectives had their suspicions, but there was no concrete proof on ground. Michael and Sheila were immediately suspected of the crime, but a grand jury was never convened to that effect. Earlier in the investigation, the police were informed by Michael's acquaintances that they had seen arguments between him and Marlene, and that Marlene had questioned Sheila about her and Michael's affair. Above all, they claimed Michael didn't seem overly saddened by Marlene's passing. Detectives knew they merely needed to fit the puzzle pieces together, because there were many of them. DNA was the case's linchpin. Police took blood and hair samples from Sheila in 1990, but they lacked the equipment to analyze them. Over 25 years passed as the samples rested in a cooler. Police were able to reactivate Marlene Warren's cold case in 2013, thanks to a federal grant they were able to obtain. They had previously tried DNA testing, but the results were inconclusive. Fortunately, technology has improved and produced sufficient evidence to charge Sheila for Marlene's murder. In September 2017, Michael and Sheila were stopped by authorities 5 minutes away from their home. They were unaware that Marlene Warren's cold case had been reopened. 27 years after the murder, the police informed them that an arrest warrant had been issued for Sheila Keene Warren. Michael Warren still maintains that neither he nor Sheila are involved. In an interview, when questioned if he was involved in the killing of his first wife, Michael replied with, "Definitely not." He further said he wouldn't have been with Sheila if he thought she had anything to do with Marlene's murder. A lawyer named Christopher DeSantis told detectives about a fascinating chat he had with Michael Warren before Marlene was killed. DeSantis claimed that Michael had questioned him about what would happen, theoretically speaking, if a husband murdered his wife. He recalled telling Michael that the husband would escape punishment if a friend of his committed the murder, and there was no way to connect the husband to the friend. Intriguingly, DeSantis also recalled telling Michael that if someone was dressed as a clown, they would get away with it, because it would be impossible to identify them. Despite this, the evidence isn't sufficient for the police to accuse Michael Warren of killing his wife Marlene. Marlene's son Joseph Aarons, who was a teenager at the time of his mother's death, remembered it as one of the worst days of his life. He expressed his desire for justice in an interview, but he would not specify whether he thought Michael was somehow involved in his mother's death. Sheila was locked away for 5 years before her trial commenced. During those times, she and Michael's love endured. They wrote each other several letters. After trial, Sheila Keene pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was given 12 years in prison.